of both the Democratic National Committee and Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. You probably recall the release of those stolen emails by WikiLeaks became a major theme in the 2016 election campaign. They were constantly mentioned by then-candidate Donald Trump. Late in the campaign, he repeatedly expressed his love of WikiLeaks from the podium. According to sources, Mueller has long had evidence to make this case, but strategic issues could dictate the timing here. Possible charges could include violations of statutes on conspiracy, election law, and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. While some officials said charges could come in weeks or months, the report goes on to say, quote, "It is also possible Mueller opts not to move forward because of concerns about exposing intelligence or other reasons, or that he files the indictment under seal so the public doesn't see it initially." Much like the indictment Mueller filed 2 weeks ago now, accusing a different group of Russians of election meddling, possible new charges are expected to rely heavily on secret intelligence from the CIA, FBI, NSA, and Department of Homeland Security. This news comes just weeks after top U.S. intelligence officials warned senators that Moscow would be back to meddle in this year's midterm elections. And it comes only 2 days, let's recall, after NSA Director Admiral Mike Rogers revealed President Trump hasn't directly told him to combat Russian hacking.
Have you been directed to do so, given the strategic threat that faces the United States and the significant consequences you recognize already?
No, I have not.
You need the direct authority of the president through the Secretary of Defense
To do some specific things.
Some specific authority.
There are some things I have the authority, and I am acting within that authority now.
And we should note tomorrow will be another busy day for Paul Manafort. The former Trump campaign chairman is scheduled to be arraigned in federal court over those additional charges that Robert Mueller filed against him last week in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Just yesterday, Manafort pleaded not guilty in Washington, D.C. to a rewritten set of charges, including allegations of money laundering. Robert Mueller's team says if these judges follow sentencing guidelines, Manafort could face 8 to 10 years in prison if convicted on all of the charges filed in Virginia, and 15 to 20 if convicted on all the charges filed in Washington. Paul Manafort is 68 years old. Let's turn to our leadoff panel on a Thursday night. Carol Lee is here with us, NBC News national political reporter. She is the co-author of our exclusive NBC News report from just last night on Robert Mueller, asking witnesses if Trump knew about these hacked Democratic emails before they were released. Also back with us, Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at the CIA and Pentagon. And we welcome back to the broadcast Cynthia Alksny, a former federal prosecutor and a Justice Department veteran. Welcome to you all. Carol, about tonight's story, what is its central impact in your view?
Well, as you mentioned, this hacking and leaking, strategic leaking of these emails was the most visible part to any American during the campaign of Russia's meddling.
Advisors who. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Breaking news, a CNN exclusive. Sources saying that U.S. counterintelligence officials are investigating one of Ivanka Trump's international business deals having to do with the Trump International Hotel and Tower in Vancouver, Canada. We're going to break that down more in just a moment. It is the latest bombshell in the growing state of chaos inside the Trump White House. For a president who prides himself on hiring only the best people, he sure has a hard time keeping them. Word tonight of yet another potential departure. CNN just learning that National Security Advisor General H.R. McMaster could be out by month's end. Long reported tensions between the general and his boss spilling out a couple of weeks ago, with Trump calling him out for not defending him vigorously enough about the Russia investigation. The administration is experiencing record turnover and struggling to attract talent. This is a president who routinely name-calls, publicly shames, and belittles his own staff, with the exception of his daughter and son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And speaking of Kushner, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, doing cleanup duty for many of the PR messes, thinks Jared's job, well, she says, is not on the line.
Jared's still a valued member of the administration, and he's going to continue to focus on the work that he's been doing.
So this is in spite of losing his top secret security clearance and facing new questions about his real estate business. But when Sanders was asked if Attorney General Jeff Sessions, whom the president called out over his decisions investigating alleged abuses by the FBI, was going to be fixed, she wasn't as going to be fired, I should say. She wasn't as certain.
Not that I know of.
So what about a replacement for outgoing White House Communications Director Hope Hicks, one of Trump's closest aides?
The decision on that hasn't been made. I don't have a personnel announcement.
And then there is Trump's embattled Chief of Staff John Kelly, who left his job as Secretary of Homeland Security to go to the White House. Well, Kelly's saying things are good inside the West Wing, that they're doing the Lord's work, but then saying this.
The last thing I wanted to do was walk away from one of the great honors of my life, being the Secretary of Homeland Security. But I did something wrong, and God punished me, I guess.
So what is going on at the White House? It's not a joke. It's nothing to joke about. But the work of the country needs to be done. Someone needs to be in charge. President Trump, who famously says he likes to operate in chaos, is indeed sowing confusion. And yesterday at a roundtable on gun legislation, he bewildered both Republicans and Democrats and demonstrated a lack of basic understanding about how the legislative process works. Well, today, he suggested the death penalty for drug dealers could help with the opioid epidemic. He also says he's imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, surprising his staff, infuriating his party, and running the risk of starting a trade war and causing the Dow Jones to drop more than 400 points. And the list goes on. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get straight to our political correspondent, Sarah Murray, standing by. But we have more breaking news. Let's get right to CNN's chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. Jim, talk to me about the breaking news. You cover this White House every single day. It's in chaos right now.
I think that's fair, Don. You know, when the wheels come off, what else comes off next? The doors and the windshield, perhaps. It's been that kind of week over here. And I think you have to separate the palace intrigue turmoil from the policy turmoil, because we've had both of those this week at the White House. And the latest example is the tariffs issue that you just mentioned. But I want to talk just very quickly, Don, about this issue of gun control, because as you know, the president had this remarkable meeting yesterday over here at the White House with lawmakers from both sides. And it was during that meeting when the president sort of rattled conservatives, rattled the NRA, when he said that it was okay with him to confiscate guns from people who are mentally ill without going through due process. That, of course, is something that would send shockwaves through the NRA on any day. And you would have never heard something like that from Barack Obama when he was president. Well, this is just happening tonight. The NRA is putting out a tweet this evening, Don, in just the last hour, saying that they had a meeting with the president over here at the White House. We can show this tweet. That's Chris Cox with the NRA. He is the executive director of the lobbying arm of the NRA, and he says, I had a great meeting tonight with the president and vice president. We all want safe schools, mental health reform, and to keep guns away from dangerous people. The president and vice president support the Second Amendment, support strong due process, and don't want gun control. That last sentence there is very important, Don. The NRA apparently got assurances from the president tonight that he supports strong due process, because you know that is obviously the kind of language that the president was using yesterday, sounding very receptive to broad, far-reaching gun control measures. At one point, you know, saying that Dianne Feinstein should put her legislation, combine it with some other pieces of legislation. That greatly unnerved not just Republicans but the National Rifle Association. It sounds like they came over here tonight to help the White House do some cleanup.
Yeah, so they had the meeting tonight, and then Cox, as you mentioned, is his official title is executive director of the NRA Institute for Legislative Action, the NRA's lobbying wing, as you said. He was also part, Jim, of the lunch with the president on Sunday, along with Wayne LaPierre and a third official. So there's so much to talk about. We'll dig into that a little bit later on in the show tonight. But CNN is now reporting, Jim, that H.R. McMaster could leave the White House by the end of the month, and I'm guessing the White House is pushing back on that.
They are pushing back on that. There was a quote from one spokesman over here that the president is referring to some of these reports as fake news. Now, of course, Don, as you and I have talked about frequently on your program, when the president describes something as fake news, more often than not, it's not fake news. And we're hearing from our sources, Jim Sciutto, Barbara Starr, and others here at CNN, hearing that McMaster could be out by the end of the month. Jim Sciutto and I are also hearing that plans may be in the works for H.R. McMaster to join the think tank, the Hoover Institution, which is based here in Washington and out at Stanford, and that may be sort of the landing spot for H.R. McMaster after he leaves the White House. No plans have been finalized or anything like that, but that is something that is being discussed at the moment. And so in addition to having Jared Kushner's security clearance downgraded from top secret to secret, the communications director, Hope Hicks, longtime aide and confidant of President Trump, departing the White House. Now you have the National Security Advisor and his name being floated out there as possibly leaving the White House in the coming weeks. Don, that is a level of turmoil and chaos that any White House would really sort of buckle under, and it's kind of amazing that it's only Thursday at this point. You would expect most of this news to sort of dump all over top of us on a Friday evening, but it's been happening just on a daily basis all week long.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, as you were speaking there, I just want to tell you the president now confirming the meeting tonight, tweeting out good and then great in parentheses, meeting in the Oval Office tonight with the NRA. Things are changing when it comes to, I would imagine, some of the things that we heard in the meeting just yesterday and maybe in some of those listening sessions last week.
And Don, just very quickly, this is interesting because you'll recall in January when the president had that immigration meeting over the White House, it happened on a Tuesday. He said, I'll take the heat, throw all the bills together, I'll sign a bill that will, give the DACA dreamers their protection and do all these other things. And then by Thursday, he had changed his mind because the far right and conservative activists and so on had essentially changed his mind over the course of 2 days. And so it's interesting, almost the same pattern emerging here, Don, with the issue of gun control. The president having this meeting, getting people on both sides of the aisle optimistic that you could have some movement on gun control. The NRA comes in on a Thursday night, I should say, and it sounds like the president may be moving back in their direction, away from strong gun control measures, and certainly away from some of the talk that really rattled conservatives yesterday.
Who was it? Was it Lindsey Graham that said there's a Tuesday Trump and then a Thursday Trump?
That's
right?
exactly,
Yeah.
and maybe the same pattern emerging here, Don.
Thank you, Jim Acosta at the White House. I appreciate that. I want to bring Sarah in now. Sarah, let's turn to your reporting on Ivanka Trump. U.S. counterintelligence officials are investigating one of her international business deals having to do with the Trump International Hotel and Tower in Vancouver, Canada. What is this about? Why is this deal attracting such scrutiny?
Well, it's an interesting one because it's not entirely clear what it is about this deal that attracted investigators' interest. Look, we know Ivanka Trump was the point person on this, and it works in very similar ways a lot of these Trump Organization deals do. The Trump Organization doesn't actually buy the building, but they strike up this licensing and branding deal. In this case, the developer happens to be a member of one of the wealthiest families in Malaysia. This particular property, which is a hotel as well as a condo unit, has, like many Trump properties, attracted a number of foreign buyers. But it's also interesting because it's one of the few Trump-branded properties that's opened since Donald Trump became president. So this one opened in February of 2017. Now, as part of this sort of security clearance process, the background check process, it's not unusual for the FBI, for counterintelligence, to look at your foreign contacts, to look at your foreign business deals. And that could be part of what's raising their concern in this case. They're always looking for any instance where there could be something that a foreign agent could potentially use against you, that could make you compromised, that could make you vulnerable. And obviously, we've seen that this has been an issue for Ivanka Trump's husband, Jared Kushner. We know from the Washington Post report earlier this week that there are a number of different countries, including China, that were talking about different ways that Jared Kushner could be compromised because of his business deals. So that's another potential reason that this could have raised some red flags with counterintelligence officials.
Does this have any impact, you think, on the Mueller investigation?
It's a great question. We don't have a good window into that. We know if counterintelligence is looking at this and anything comes up that is cause for concern or that they think could be pertinent to the special counsel's investigation, they would share that information. But as of right now, Ivanka Trump is in this sort of rare position of being someone who is very close to the president, obviously his firstborn daughter, but also a trusted confidant, and has really been spared not just from Bob Mueller's investigation, but really any of these Russia probes. She hasn't been called in for an interview with Bob Mueller. She said that in an interview with NBC News, and she hasn't been called to testify in front of any of the committees that are looking into this either. So she really has managed to sort of dodge the glare of the Russia investigation.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Sarah Murray. Now I want to bring in CNN political analyst Ryan Lizza and Kirsten Powers and CNN political commentator Matt Lewis. Good evening to all of you. There's so much news to cover. We wanted to talk about, Ivanka Trump, about McMaster and on. But then just now we heard about this NRA meeting. Kirsten, I'm curious to know what you think about this. The NRA saying they met with the president tonight. They want, they're very strong about the Second Amendment. They don't want gun control. And the president confirming that he met with them not only tonight, but also on Sunday as well.
Well, I think, look, he's definitely got himself into trouble making this comment about basically taking away people's guns, people who are mentally ill, without using due process. It was something that I think was quite jarring to people who are supporters of gun rights, and frankly, I would say to most people, because this is not the kind of thing that you usually hear people saying, and it doesn't really help the cause of gun control, because this is sort of people's worst fear, is that people's guns will be taken away with no process, and so Trump has had to sort of walk this back and I think do a lot of reassurance. But I think it says a lot about what he thinks. I think on this issue, he actually is personally for gun control. He's not a real pro-gun person per se, and I think what he said was actually how he really feels.
Matt, it sounds like she's saying, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, lip service, and is not really going to do anything about it. That's what the discussion yesterday and today has been. The president will often say things, and he appeals to people, and then, but when it comes to actually doing it, he doesn't really do it.
Yeah, I think that's about right. We've seen this, we've seen this before. This is now a pattern. It seems like, well, there's a couple patterns. One is the pattern of Donald Trump coming out and having these meetings and saying he's going to do something and then not doing it. And then we have another pattern, which is school shootings or mass shootings, and a lot of attention, media attention, demands for action, and then a few days, a few weeks pass, and nothing happens. I am of the opinion that the NRA should now be, if you really want to defend the Second Amendment, I think that the time to sort of batten down the hatches and say, look, we're not going to do anything. We don't, this is a slippery slope. I think those days are over. Why not do something? Marco Rubio just yesterday had a pretty moderate approach. He was not going for anything radical, but it's just things like raising the age to, say, like 21. I don't remember if that was part of it or not, that Rubio laid out, to get a rifle. I don't even know if that's gun control. It's already for pistols, for handguns, 21. So do something. I think that not only would that be, the right thing to do, sort of morally or ethically, but I think it actually would do more to defend the Second Amendment than having this, like, we're not going to do anything stance.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, we had this discussion last night, and I think someone on the panel said it was great television, but it wasn't necessarily, didn't result in any policy changes, and nor would anyone think it would.
Yeah, look, I actually give the White House a lot of credit for broadcasting that. It wasn't nearly as canned as most political events are. Most of the senators and congressmen were pretty candid about where they stood. I think you got a genuine sense of what Trump's gut is on all the relevant issues.
But in the context of the NRA thing tonight, the meeting, and
yeah, where were the cameras at that meeting, right? Right. And look, the thing that we are all getting used to and grappling with is when the president says something, we are used to believing that it matters, and we are used to believing that the president's words on policy are what the White House position is on any given issue, and that there's a well-thought-out process before the president speaks. That's how most modern presidents and most modern White Houses have operated. It does not work that way with Trump. What he says doesn't really matter when it comes to what the final policy of the White House or his party will be. It's just what pops into his mind at that given, at that moment. There's sort of no unventilated thought from this president. And I think that's the thing that, over the last year and a few months that we've really had to struggle with understanding is such a major change in a president. His policy pronouncements don't actually set policy for his party. That is set by the interest groups on an issue like gun control and by the Republican leadership in Congress. And we all know that a session like tonight with the NRA in the Oval Office is to walk Trump through all of the stumbles he had in that open meeting, particularly with the due process, where he just said, if someone complains that someone's crazy, you go in and grab their gun and let the courts look at it later.
Yeah, and it's kind of a bait and switch. I guess some would think that it is, but again, they hadn't decided on any policy. It was just them discussing what they would do and learning how the president felt about it. But I want to move on, and I want to talk about other issues.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kirsten, quickly if you can.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm not sure that it is a bait and switch necessarily. I think that he has views that are not in line with conservative orthodoxy, and so he says things, and I think these are really his feelings, whether it's about immigration, DACA, gun control, and then he runs into the buzzsaw of politics and finds out, actually, that's never going to happen.
The problem is that his views are not only are his views not in line with conservatism, they're not in line with the Constitution. And we talk about depriving due process. I mean, not just conservatives. Like any civil libertarian should be outraged. Now, there is the idea, of course, about the gun violence restraining orders, which I think he sort of took that idea and blew it up.
Yeah. Okay, well, I got to get to the break, so we'll talk about the other stuff after this break. But stick around, everyone. That's okay. When we come back, more on the chaos engulfing the White House, including President Trump's continued attacks on Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Will he join the long list?
Get today at 23andme.com.
Adding to the growing sense of chaos inside the Trump White House, the chief of staff jokingly saying that God punished him and President Trump's continued attacks on his own attorney general. Back with me now, Ryan Lizza, Kirsten Powers, and Matt Lewis. I want to play this moment. This is from the president. This is a year ago. Watch this.
I turn on the TV, open the newspapers, and I see stories of chaos. Chaos. Yet it is the exact opposite. This administration is running like a fine-tuned machine.
Okay, so that's a fine-tuned machine, but then that was a month into his presidency, and he was disputing reports of chaos then. This is a year later. And I just want to say that, hearing about the president wanting to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, Gary Cohn said that he would leave the White House if that would happen. Maggie Haberman is confirming that tonight, saying the previous day Mr. Trump's chief economic advisor, Gary D. Cohn, warned the chief of staff, John F. Kelly, that he might resign if the president went ahead with the plan, according to people briefed on the discussion. Mr. Cohn, a former Goldman Sachs president, had lobbied fiercely against the measures. What do you say to that, Kirsten Powers?
I mean, wasn't this one of the main things that the president was that Donald Trump ran on to become president, was his anti-trade position? It's a little strange to me that someone would come into this administration and be shocked that he would do something that's anti-trade.
Listen, the president was also reportedly fuming and indignant, Ryan, after his attorney general Jeff Sessions publicly pushed back against Trump's Twitter attack. I mean, it's pretty incredible to think about that. The president again publicly called out his attorney general, and he expects Sessions to just sit there and do nothing.
Yeah. Whenever I see that clip that you played to set this up of the fine-tuned machine, I think of that Leslie Nielsen movie where he's standing in front of a building that's just exploded and people are jumping out of the windows, and he's saying, "Nothing to see here, everything's fine."
Move it along, right?
We're fortunate that we're not involved in any sort of major crisis internationally, despite what's going on in North Korea and Syria, and there's certainly some hot spots. But we're fortunate that this president hasn't been tested with a major confrontation the way that other presidents have in their early administration. Because I can't think, in 20 years of covering the White House, I can't think of a time when the White House was as dysfunctional and just at a staff level was so chaotic, with reports of top economic advisors, top national security advisors, the chief of staff, and the top communications aide, all either in disarray or talking about leaving. And thank God the economy's humming along, and we're doing okay in a lot of other ways, because this is not a great system for dealing with a really serious crisis. And, you know, we talk about this internal palace intrigue all the time. And the reason it matters is when, you know, when it hits the fan, you want the president to be served by a competent staff. And that is just not happening right now.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, look, this is we can put up the Wall Street Journal saying that Trump's tariff folly, his tax on aluminum and steel will hurt the economy and his voters. Also saying that Donald Trump made the biggest policy blunder of his presidency on Thursday by announcing that he's going to impose these tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. What do you think? I mean, this is the Wall Street Journal, a conservative paper.
Yeah, I don't know how much this is going to end up mattering. We don't even really know what the executive order is going to be. He just sort of prematurely announced it. But, you know, right now, this looks to me like there's several problems. Number one, obviously, it's a tax on American consumers. I think it's picking winners and losers. So it goes, you know, if you're a conservative, a free marketer, it certainly goes against that. I mean, if you're in the steel business, that's great. What if you're Boeing? What if you're GM? Your prices are going to go up. You're going to pass that along to the consumer. You know, this is just not, and we talked about the economy is humming. Why would you now introduce something new that has the potential to mess that up? There's also the chance that this could really offend our allies. Canada, I believe, is our number one, the number one supplier here. I don't know if there's going to be a carve-out, if Canada's going to be excluded, but this has a potential to create some bad blood with some of our allies. So I just don't see the upside to doing this, other than it's like Donald Trump has wanted to do this. This is consistent with his populist, you know, vibe. But, you know, again, I guess if you're his top economic advisor and you think this is a disaster and he doesn't take your advice, maybe you should hit the bricks.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about so many people who are leaving. I have to ask you, Ryan, do you see, when we were talking about Hope Hicks last night, her leaving her job, and it seems like it can't be said enough, her departure means that we could be in for even a bumpier ride.
Yeah, look, I think that, I mean, on the one hand, you know, I used to say this a lot during the campaign when he had a lot of staff turmoil. At the end of the day, the problem with the Trump universe is Donald Trump. The issues always go back to him and his management style, and that's the reason for the turmoil in all of the enterprises that he's run. So, you know, we can exaggerate the importance of any single staffer, but you know, her reputation, and most reporting shows that she was very important in occasionally preventing, you know, bad things from happening, in sanding down some of his worst impulses, and that, you know, she played a sort of critical role in that White House. I don't think nobody's irreplaceable in a White House. I think the problems in this White House run a whole lot deeper.
And who wants to have the possibility of that many legal bills? And by the way, Ryan, you were on the panel last night, and I said something last night. It was an attempt to make a broader point about Fox News and how they downplay bad news about the administration. I think you understood it. Most people understood it. It was saying that I think it was a bad example about Hope Hicks, but there was a broader context if you watch the entire show about how Fox hadn't covered it. I mean, they hadn't covered it at all, but how they broadly downplay big stories and important news for this White House.
But Don,
I was just one sec, Kirsten, because this turned into a little bit of a kerfuffle today, and what I understood you to be saying, Don, is not that Fox did not report that Hope Hicks was resigning. Of course they did. But that it was a major, major story that every news station was covering extremely aggressively and putting it into context, and that Fox was, frankly, and this is true, downplaying it. But anyway, that's the way, I understood what you were saying.
Yeah, it wasn't particularly this, but they had covered it, though. So, I mean, that was a bad example, and so apologies for that. But go ahead, Kirsten, what do you want to say?
Oh, I was going to say, I actually think Hope Hicks is irreplaceable. Yeah. I think most people are not irreplaceable, but she is somebody who is you know, anybody who's dealt with her, I mean, she is just sort of the sanity in the middle of a lot of chaos, and she's extremely competent, extremely professional, separate from how she manages the president. I think she's somebody that reporters feel like, I know I have felt when I've worked with her in the past, she's reliable and she's professional and very straightforward. And that is something that just really is lacking in this White House.
So who can do that now? Is there anyone in line in the chain?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And I think that she, you know, I think, and then you add in the role that she played with the president, which she's just, you know, Trump whisperer. She knows how to manage him. She knows how to sort of protect other people from him when he's getting angry and those kinds of things. I just don't know. The closest I can think of is kind of like an Uma Abedin to Hillary Clinton. It's that kind of relationship.
But look at what Uma Abedin
these
did
people
to Hillary
are not
Clinton.
Replaceable.
Look at what happened with Uma Abedin, and I would say the same thing about Hope Hicks. I mean, she may be very competent, but she hasn't had a very good couple of weeks or months here. The relationship with Rob Porter, trying to protect him, not a good look. And then yesterday saying, you know, she might have told some white lies. If this is as good as it gets, if she's irreplaceable.
Well, I think the white lies thing, honestly, is getting a little not appropriately covered. I mean, she was talking about specifically. She said specifically she might tell a white lie, and I think all of us here have told these kind of white lies. If you're working for somebody says, is he available? And she says no. She was very specific. She wasn't saying, she was telling, and she's even said, I'm not telling white lies about Russia. And then the Uma Abedin, I don't know, what did she do to Hillary? It's not her fault what her husband did. What are you even talking about?
Well, it didn't work out so good.
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate it. When we come back, I'll ask a congressman on the Justice Committee how problematic he thinks the president's accelerating attack.
Most trusted name in news.
No word yet from the White House about a replacement for Hope Hicks as communications director. She resigned yesterday, one day after testifying before the House Intel Committee and admitting to lawmakers that she sometimes tells, you know, what amounts to white lies for the president. Joining me now is Congressman Dave Cicilline, Rhode Island Democrat, who is a member of the Judiciary Committee. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you here in the studio. So sources are saying that the special counsel Robert Mueller, looking into a statement by Hope Hicks that she gave right after the 2016 election, denying any contacts with the Russians and the Trump campaign. Everything you know, and how important do you think Hope Hicks is to the Russia investigation?
Well, I don't think we know the answer to that, but we know for sure that she has worked for the president for a very long time, a close confidant in his inner circle, and someone who has now left, resigns sort of quickly. So I think it's hard to know what role she'll play, but she certainly would be aware of a lot of the president's contacts and a lot of the meetings and conversations. So, you know, we'll have to see. But I think her departure is probably very troubling for the president.
The special counsel also reportedly investigating this president's efforts to drive the attorney general from his job, if that is an effort to obstruct the Russia investigation. What is your tell on that?
Well, look, I think there's no question the president has been in a feud with his own attorney general for the last 9 months. I think this is definitely an effort to undermine him, to undermine the investigation, to undermine his decision to recuse himself in the hopes that he might ultimately drive Jeff Sessions out so that he can appoint a new attorney general who can either fire or restrict the investigation of Mr. Mueller. So I think the other thing is, you know, this is another example where the president is demonstrating very clearly that rather than truth-telling and honesty and integrity and rule of law, it's personal loyalty that's the most important thing to him. This is about his disappointment that the Attorney General wasn't personally loyal, which of course means the President doesn't fundamentally understand that the Attorney General takes an oath to the Constitution and to apply the rule of law and to safeguard our democratic institutions, not to be personally loyal to the President of the United States.
You say all of this, but then in the larger scheme, none of it seems to matter. It just keeps continuing and continuing.
No, I think it does. I think there's tremendous chaos, but I think the one thing that is very clear is that Robert Mueller and his team are doing their investigation. They are proceeding aggressively. I think they're seeing significant progress. I think the president is becoming increasingly concerned about that progress. And I think that so long as we protect the integrity of that investigation, make sure that Robert Mueller is free from political interference, that he has the resources he needs to do his job. And this should be of concern to everyone. We need to get to the bottom of this. We need to let these professionals do their work. And the president has attempted in a million different ways to stop this investigation, to slow it down, to impede it. We simply cannot allow that to happen.
Okay, so then what about Jeff Sessions, right? right? Because and the most recent attacks on Sessions, he calling him disgraceful for relying on an independent inspector general to investigate potential FISA abuse rather than the Justice Department lawyers.
Well, I mean, I think the Attorney General made a statement today reasserting his intention to protect the rule of law and attesting to his integrity. The unfortunate thing is we need the Attorney General to speak up when the President attacks the Department of Justice and the FBI as well. He seems like when he's attacked personally, he's quick to come to his own defense, but we need him to defend the rule of law in these important institutions and the brave men and women in the FBI and the brave men and women in our Justice Department. It'd be useful if he was a more forceful defender of those institutions.
I want you to take a look at this and look at all the comments from this president that he made about his Attorney General in the past. How can he work effectively when he doesn't appear to have the support of the president? Idiot, beleaguered, very weak, very disappointed with him. He did a terrible thing, disgraceful.
Well, I mean, I think in part you have to consider the source of those criticisms. This is an Attorney General who recused himself from an investigation that resulted in the appointment of a special counsel who has indicted a number of individuals, charged a number of individuals, who is leading a very serious investigation of the president's campaign and potential collusion with the Russians as well as obstruction of justice. I think, it's clear that the president is unhappy about that. He ought to be unhappy about it, but it's important that this investigation continue. And I think, Jeff Sessions will be tested. The question is, will he hold firm and continue to ensure that the Department of Justice is permitted to do its work and the special counsel is protected, and whether he'll continue to stand up to the president and stay in that position. I think what the president hopes is that Jeff Sessions will leave, that he can appoint a new Attorney General that will not be required to recuse him or herself, and that he can then manage to either close down the investigation or even fire Rod Rosenstein and Robert Mueller with the new Attorney General. So I never thought I'd find myself defending or hoping to protect Jeff Sessions, because we have strong disagreements with his management of the Justice Department in a lot of policy areas. But I think in this context, we cannot allow the president to interfere in any way with this ongoing investigation, which I think is what he's trying to do.
Congressman Cicilline, thank you for coming in. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much. When we come back, Vladimir Putin says he has a lot of new weapons and they're battle ready. Should the U.S. be worried that he is advertising the new nukes by showing one targeting Florida? I'm going to ask General Michael Hayden, a former director of both the CIA and
American Dynasties, The Kennedys, premieres Sunday, March 11th at 9 on CNN.
In a speech before Parliament today, Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia is armed with an invincible nuclear-capable missile. He then turned to a video demonstration showing a potential missile trajectory. It appears to be heading right towards Florida, where President Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate is. Putin suggesting his nuclear warheads would leave NATO defenses completely useless. It is a claim he was asked about tonight on NBC.
Every single weapon system discussed today easily surpasses and avoids an anti-missile defense system.
But you've tested it?
The test was excellent. Some of them still have to be fine-tuned and worked on. Others are already available to the troops and already are battle ready.
For the record, right now, do you have a workable ICBM that's powered by nukes that you've tested successfully?
All of those tests were successful. It's just each of these weapon systems is at a different stage of readiness. One of them is already on combat duty. It's with troops.
Let's discuss now with CNN National Security Analyst General Michael Hayden, the former director of the CIA and the NSA. General, welcome.
Thank you.
He says these, and I'm quoting here, they're invincible. Invincible new weapons are battle ready. Is he just flexing his muscle, or is he actually putting the West on notice?
So I mean, this is important, but I guess my overall counsel, Don, will be let's not hyperventilate over this. What we know for sure is he's got a video game with mediocre graphics that he showed to his parliament today. He's got some weapons that I think our Department of Defense knew he was developing, all right? And some of them may be, as he suggested, further along than others. But I don't think any of them, even if they were fully operational, changes the strategic equation, the strategic balance between us and the Russians. We've got to respond. We're going to have to spend money we probably shouldn't have to spend to keep the nuclear balance where it should be. But fundamentally, he said, now I've got weapons that evade American defenses. He had weapons that evade American defenses. We have no effective defense against traditional
Russian ICBMs. What missile defenses we have are designed for the accidental launch.
This is the animation, by the way, that you were talking about.
Yeah, the accidental launch or the limited attack from a country like Iran or the North Koreans. It's never designed to protect us from the Russians.
Today, the White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked about her reaction to Putin's rhetoric. Listen to this.
Russia has been developing destabilizing weapons systems for over a decade in direct violations of its treaty obligations. President Trump understands the threats facing America and our allies in this century and is determined to protect our homeland and preserve peace through strength. U.S. defense capabilities are and will remain second to none. And now, because of the new defense budget of $700 billion, our military will be far stronger than ever. As the President's nuclear posture review made clear, America is moving forward to modernize our nuclear arsenal and ensure our capabilities are unmatched.
She's saying $700 billion. That's the answer. Is that the message?
Yeah, there's a lot in that message, all right? And she talked about our defenses are second to none, but you need to use the word defense in a fairly generic way. This is not about preventing an attack, defending against an attack. What she talked about at the end of her statement was investing in our own weapons, and that's back to the concept earlier, Don. You want to maintain the strategic balance so the Russians never have an incentive to use their weapons.
General Hayden, I want you to stick around. We have much more to talk about. When we come back, sources telling CNN that the Trump administration could preemptively strike North Korea if they build a nuclear missile. CNN Tonight starts.